Welcome to Precalculus Concept 26b underneath trig functions of any angle. We're going to use the signs of trig functions to evaluate trig functions in different quadrants. There's 4 boxes. So let's begin here with box number 1. And I have for you, it says all students take calculus. Now, what the heck does this even mean? Okay, so this is a phrase that a lot of math teachers use to teach students in which quadrant the trig function is in terms of positive or negative. So what I mean by that, and so A stands so in quadrant 1, every single trig function you can think of is going to be positive. So consider a point in quadrant 1, like for example, like 2, 3. Okay, the x value is 2, the y value is 3. So both x's and y's are positive, so that means that cosine and sine is going to be positive. And since tangent is just the quotient of sine and cosine, then that's going to be positive too. So that means that all of the other functions in trig are going to be positive as well. So in quadrant 1, A stands for every single trig function is positive. S stands for students, and all students take calculus. And in quadrant 2, the sign, since it's the S value, is going to be positive. That's going to make the cosecant also positive, but cosine will be negative. That's going to make the secant negative. And since tangent is just sine over cosine, well, a positive divided by a negative is going to be negative. And then since cotangent is the reciprocal, then the cotangent is going to also be negative. So in the phrase, all students take calculus, the S stands for sine in quadrant 2, meaning that's positive. T in take is going to be quadrant 3, meaning that the tangent is positive, because the T right there. And then that means cotangent is also positive. Of course, sine and cosine are both negative. That makes cosecant and secant also negative. Oh, sorry, kind of blew up there. And then finally, C for calculus means cosine. So cosine is going to be positive. And then secant is going to be positive. That makes sine and cosecant negative. That makes tangent negative and cotangent negative. So all students take calculus means that every single function, trig function, is going to be positive in quadrant number 1. Only the sine and the cosecant are positive in quadrant 2. Only tangent and cotangent are positive in quadrant 3. And then C for calculus, only cosine and secant are positive in quadrant number 4. So that's a mnemonic device to help you remember which trig function is positive in which quadrant. Okay, box 2 is an example. It says find the quadrant in which the angle lies. So it says that the tangent is negative, but the cosine is positive. So I would go like this and say, okay, all students take calculus. So since the tangent is going to be negative, I know it can't be quadrant number 1 and it can't be quadrant number 2. So that means either quadrant 1 or quadrant number 3. And since cosine is positive, cosine is positive in quadrant number 3, so therefore it can't be quadrant number 2. So this information is telling me that this angle is somewhere in quadrant number 4, my bad. And then number 2, both sine and cosine are negative. So again, right, here's all students take calculus. So it can't be quadrant number 1 since they're both negative. Sine is positive in quadrant number 2, so it can't be that one. Cosine is positive in quadrant 4, so it can't be that one. So it must be quadrant number 3. And of course, any point that you think of, you'd have to go left and then down on the coordinate plane. So therefore, both of the x and the y's would be negative. So that makes sense that that is quadrant number 3. So there's an example for you of how you would use this stuff. Okay, box number 3 is another example. It says, given that the tangent of theta is negative 2/3 and the cosine of theta is greater than 0, find the cosecant of theta. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is figure out what quadrant we're talking about here. So remember, all students take calculus. So what do we know? Cosine is positive, okay? So cosine is going to be positive either in quadrant number 4 or in quadrant number 1. That's all that we know. It can't be this one and it can't be that one. Okay? And the tangent is negative, so it must be quadrant number 4. So now that I know that it's in quadrant number 4, I'm going to draw a picture that highlights quadrant number 4. And this is the angle theta that I'm talking about. So this is going to be my theta on the inside that I can use to draw my right triangle. And what do I know about this angle? I know that its theta is a value of negative 2/3. So the ratio of the opposite to the adjacent is negative 2 to 3. So I want the cosecant, right? And the cosecant of theta is the same thing as 1 over the sine of theta. So I need to figure out what my r value is. So r is going to be the square root of x squared plus y squared. So that's going to be the square root of 3 squared plus negative 2 squared. So that's going to be 9 and 4. So that's going to give me just the square root of 13. So the square root of 13. And this is going to be 1 over the sine. So that's going to be 1 divided by, the sine of theta is the opposite to the hypotenuse. So negative 2 over rad 13. So therefore, this is going to be negative rad 13 over 2 when I flip and multiply. So the cosecant of theta would be negative rad 13 over 2. Okay, box 4 is a U-track. Given that the tangent of theta is negative 1/3 and that cosine is negative, find the secant of theta. Okay, hopefully you got the right answer. Tangent is negative and cosine is negative. That's going to happen in quadrant number 3. Find the secant of theta. So I draw a picture in quadrant number 3, and I know that the ratio of the tangent of my angle is in negative 1/3. So I know that the 1 has to be here and the negative 3 has to be here. Therefore, I can figure out my value of r by taking the square root of negative 1 squared plus 3 squared. So I get the square root of 10. And the secant is 1 over the cosine, which is 1 over negative 3 over rad 10, which is negative rad 10 over 3. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys.